Act 170, we have to do a cooperative endeavor agreement. And that is outlined in the governor's executive order from 2016, whereby it says that line item appropriations require a cooperative endeavor agreement or contract between the recipient and the executive branch state agency. So we have to get these funds to these entities that's in the legislation through a cooperative endeavor agreement. You may be asking, why don't I have those for you today for these line item appropriations? And the reason is, it's multiple, but as an example, one of these in here is an entity, a vendor, that these are going to call MapNation. That involves technology and involves an online platform. As such, we as a state agency here at the Department of Education, we're required by another law, anytime that we engage in contracts, cooperative endeavor agreements, etc., we have to go through OTS for those, the Office of Technology Services. And then they review and make sure that there's nothing relative to cybersecurity, to privacy, data being exchanged, etc. So we have been engaging with them on these particular dollars that have been allocated. So as soon as, for example, we get the process outlined for how are we going to move forward this technology allocation, if it is indeed a technology allocation, the department will then have to IAT that money over to the Office of Technology Services, who will then go forward and appropriate these funds to an agreement. However, they could be reviewing this and say, look, it's really not technology that's being provided, it's a professional service. Therefore, Department of Education, you do the cooperative endeavor agreement and you bring it to the board. As soon as we get these ready, we don't want to wait, because what that means is I would have to wait until October 12th to bring that back to you, these cooperative endeavor agreements. So as soon as we get these ready and they're prepared, cooperative endeavor agreements for these funds and the line item appropriations, we will probably be seeking an emergency contract from President Garvey to move these forward, so we can get the funds out, so we don't have to wait until October again. And I'll pause there to see if there's any questions about the process.
Mr. Garvey.
Yes, I'd like to add that I really don't like doing emergency orders. I don't like doing anything that gives DESI members only 24 hours notice before something's going to happen. So I was encouraging this presentation so y'all know several months in advance, possibly in some instances, that this stuff is coming and it will come as an executive order. It won't be as caught off guard.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Bradford? Your time.
Thank you.
Is that it? Great. Thank you. Appreciate all your work. Next. Any comments, suggestions, opposition? Okay. None. Motion carried. Next item.
On page 267, item 5.7, consideration of an update regarding the Louisiana Legislative Auditor Report. Recommendation is to receive.
Anyone? Motion, please. Mr. Rock. Thank you. Ms. Jones, second. Yes, Dr. Brumley.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Holiday. So one of the things that we wanted to do as a result of the annual audit by the Legislative Auditor's Office is just share with you the findings from this year's report. We just wanted to be very open and transparent with those issues that were explored during the annual routine audit and share the areas where we know that we have had to make some adjustments or are making adjustments. And so we wanted to provide a presentation to you all just to share that information with you so that you would know the contents of that report. And also just share that because of COVID years, the auditors were looking across all agencies at more money than they have looked at in a long time because of all the ESSER dollars that are available and all the complexities around that. So I've asked Mr. Bradford to also just provide an update report to the board around that routine audit from the legislative auditor.
Okay, while we're waiting to pull up the slide, I'll begin. Additionally, as part of my new role that started in March, one of the other duties is serving as liaison with the Louisiana Legislative Auditor, the legislative audit process. Beginning in March, April, we started to having some initial exit interviews with the legislative auditor around the 2020-2021 audit for the department. There were three components to that. There was the annual comprehensive financial report of the state of Louisiana, the single audit of the state of Louisiana, and an evaluation of our accountability over federal and public funds. So what I'll start with is the first part of that, and I'm on slide 5. I'm on slide 5, and that is, as part of its audit, the annual comprehensive financial report, here's what the legislative auditor considered. Our internal control over financial reporting and evidence supporting certain LDOE account balances and classes of transactions. So this was the first part. There were three things that we were looking at. This particular part, what the conclusion was in the report that was released publicly on June 27th was that LDOE's account balances and classes of transactions tested are materially correct. The second part was the single audit of the state of Louisiana, and there were three findings in this area. And what I'll do is I'll go through these three findings, and then I'll go on our financial accountability. There's one other area that the auditor flagged. I'll go through all four of these, and then what I'll do is I'll pause, and I will, if you have questions, we will have staff that can speak to this. These are Deputy Superintendent Beth Sino, or Assistant Deputy Superintendent Keisha Payton, or Dr. Janet Chasson over early childhood. So the first area was misappropriated funds in the Child Care Assistance Program. The second area was incorrect reporting of expenditures on the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And the third was non-compliance with reporting requirements for the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. So the first finding was what they categorized in the report as misappropriation of funds in the Child Care Assistance Program. So this will be the first of four that I'm sharing, and the way I'm going to share it with you is I have distilled what the finding is that was in the report. Second thing is what is the corrective action on behalf of the Department of Education, and then any other notes relative to this finding. The first one was that the Department of Education, we had identified a former employee who had misappropriated $74,000 of Child Care Assistance Program funds by manipulating provider information and submitting and receiving payments on 4 alleged fraudulent grant applications. Directly following the incident, the department immediately reviewed the program's internal control structure. As a result, additional preventive policies and procedures were identified and immediately implemented to segregate duties and provide additional reviews of banking information charges. On this particular finding, I want to point out that this current system for doing this was one that we inherited from DCFS that was mandated through Act 868 of the 2014 legislative session. Number two is that through our detection methods here at the Department of Education, we identified and discovered that these funds were being misappropriated. The employee was immediately placed on leave, terminated, and criminal charges were filed. The second finding was incorrect reporting of expenditures on schedule of expenditures of federal awards. So there's basically two ways that when our Food and Nutrition Division is reporting the expenditures of the U.S. Department of Agriculture dollars that have been expended in the state, which annually there's roughly $450 million that are expended on food and nutrition program. There's one category of funding when it gets coded and reported that says we spent X amount of dollars on daycare and family home food and nutrition programs. So if you're authorized as a daycare center and you receive food and nutrition dollars, we code that. There's a particular code for this, and there's 80 possible codes. One of those codes we would say is we spent X amount of dollars there for daycare food and nutrition. It was $70 million. And what happened was there was a coding area. In lieu of coding that $70 million as daycare food and nutrition, it got coded as school lunch program food and nutrition expenditure. So it was an entry error. The corrective action was we are evaluating the process for identifying and recording the correct assistance listing number for the federal grants within our accounting system. Detective internal controls are going to be strengthened in the review of assistance listing numbers, of which I said there were 80, and their input into our system to minimize the risk of incorrect recording in the future. In addition, we have multi-level review and approval processes for federal grant reports is being examined to ensure internal controls over the preparation process are strengthened to detect incorrect recording. Another note on this one is that the adjustments to the incorrect coding have been made to record the proper assistance listing number in the accounting system to ensure that reporting is accurate going forward, and no other adjustments are needed at this time. No funds were lost, jeopardized, or misappropriated as evidenced by the absence of the LLA, Louisiana Legislative Audit findings regarding this topic. The third finding is non-compliance with reporting requirements for the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. As part of this act, we failed to report subaward information for 3 Title I Part A grants. So to distill this for you, when you're here, and like today, you approved a set of allocations. Had a set of those allocations been for Title I, there's a certain threshold of dollar amount that anytime we make an allocation as a state to a school system, we have to report that to the U.S. Department of Education. And in this case, the Title I allocations did not get reported in the 2020-2021 school year. What are we doing to correct this? Number one is we're providing specialized training to the current staff on reporting requirements to enhance and minimize the risk of omissions in reporting. We have also advertised, it was posted recently, for a position that will be dedicated to doing this, an Ed Program Consultant 4 position. And this will be what they do, is they work on the federal reporting for our grants. I think the note here for this that I wanted to flag for the board, that the way we discovered this is we were doing this same type of reporting to the feds for all of the ESSER dollars that we have. The $4 billion that we've received for ESSER, we were reporting this. We're saying we gave this amount of money to each of the school systems. And in doing that, we noticed the Title I was left blank. And we went back and looked, and it hadn't been reported since 2015. And so my question was, well, why did it take so many years for us to why wasn't this noticed in the previous audit? And as it's been explained to me by our audit staff, is that they randomly audit different things. This is not one of the things that came up as an audit. And so this was something that we discovered, we reported it, and now it is in here as a finding. The fourth part of the fourth finding was part of that third piece of the legislative audit, which was an evaluation of our accountability over public funds. The legislative audit performed various procedures that included obtaining, documenting, and reviewing our internal control and compliance with related laws and regulations over the Student Scholarship for Educational Excellence Program. The conclusion in the audit was that there was a finding related to non-compliance with Student Scholarships for Education Excellence Program scholarship payment and reporting. The finding stated that we provided supplemental payments totaling $2.6 million to participating schools in the scholarship program without ensuring those payments did not exceed the maximum payments allowed under state law. Also, we did not submit the annual report on the scholarship program to state legislative committees and individual legislators within the necessary time frame. I would make a note here that we don't fully agree with this finding, because we do not consider these payments to be supplemental. Louisiana law and BESIC policy require that scholarship tuition amounts be equal to non-scholarship student tuition. In 2017, we froze tuition to participating scholarship schools with the understanding that tuition increases would be paid if additional funds were appropriated in the program. In 2021, additional funds were appropriated to the program by the legislature, prompting us to increase the tuition to scholarship schools. That is the last finding. That was the fourth one. I will pause here to see if there are any questions relative to any of the four findings that we had, and we'll have appropriate executive level staff come speak.
Any questions?
Either of us. Yes.
Any questions? Yes, Dr. Davis.
So I watched the joint legislative committee that went over these audits, and so I just want to be clear that I understand the last one regarding the student scholarships. So what we did was, when the legislature gave us additional funds in 2021, we increased our scholarship plans to match the school tuition starting in 2021. And so this was not an instance where we were going and back paying the difference starting in 2017. It was in 2021 going forward, we matched the tuition.
Yeah, I'll let Deputy Superintendent Sino, she was going to speak on this.
While she comes, I just want to point out that we don't agree with this particular finding, just because when funding was frozen for these schools, these scholarship schools in 2017, there was a promise to them that should funding be made available, they would then see a tuition increase. In 2021, we were able to work to be able to provide, I believe, an additional $1 million to the scholarship program. And so with that, those schools knew that there was an additional appropriation, and we wanted to make sure that we honored the word of the department in 2017 to go and provide the additional funding for those schools. But Beth, you can speak more to that.
Yes, Beth Sienna with the department. That is correct. We gave them the money based on the fact that we had never been able to increase the tuition due to the limitations of the appropriation.
So starting in 2021, we increased their rates and will continue to pay them that amount accordingly. And hopefully, if the legislature increases the amounts as their tuitions rise, we'll be able to match that. Is that how it works?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. C? Thank you. Mr. Bradford, you may continue.
That's the end of my
That's
presentation.
it, okay. Thank you. Next item, I'm sorry, any objection? Motion carried. Next item, please.
On page 299, item 6.1, consideration of AG funding cycle activities, approval of AG statewide programs for fiscal year 2022-2023. Recommendation is to approve.
Motion, Dr. Davis, Mr. Garding, second. Any questions, comments? Without objection, motion carried. Next item, please. Sorry, Ms. Orange Jones?
I have to recuse.
Just to recuse. Ms. Jones? 6.1, got it. Thank you. Okay, next item, please.
On page 331, item 8.1, consideration of a legislative update. Recommendation is to receive.
Motion, please. Dr. Davis? Mr. Gardner? Thank you. Yes, Dr. Green.
Yes, ma'am. At the meeting in June, Dr. Davis requested this item be placed on the agenda, I believe. And so what we wanted to do is to just bring forward our report on relevant legislation that was passed. Mr. Lonsall will be coming to the table to offer his support on any questions that you may have on legislation that was passed. And Dr. Davis, if you have any other from needs relative to this, we're happy to address any questions you may have.
Mr. Lawson, do you have anything to say?
In your packets, you'll see that there is a legislative implementation plan. So all the bills that were passed this legislative session are in there, and it details what bulletins will need to be revised, and then also when we anticipate to bring it before you. You'll see we're trying to do almost all of them before the end of the year. December will be the last month we'll be considering these. If everything goes to plan, sometimes things go awry. So this plan may change a little bit depending on when we bring it to you, but we are trying to get everything in place in policy by December.
Yes, that's amazing. Thank you for this update. Dr. Davis, thank you. Yes.
I do have some questions about how so in the past several years, we have had, basically, we get reports about positions that Bessie may or may not be taking on legislation periodically as we move through the legislative cycle. And my question is surrounding the fact that for the first time this past legislative session, DOE had their own set of bills that they were working with legislators to pass. So we would say, like, this is DOE's bill. And so my question is there a way for the department's legislative agenda to come to Bessie for discussion prior to the legislative session for a general consensus on what this piece of legislation is for, and would the department be able to say that they have the backing of Bessie as they move forward with these items? And I ask that because there's a lot of consternation among legislators that you had to face, Mr. Malassaw, and sometimes Mr. Day, from legislators about the fact that Bessie is not taking positions, or they don't know, what the department's general agenda is. And so I would like it if, prior to the legislative session, that the department has a list of items that they're going to be pursuing legislatively, that it come to us as a board, that we can discuss it, and so that those of us, if there are things that we're in favor of, those of us that are in town that might be able to go and testify and be able to lend support to the department's efforts, that we could do that. And I would also like to know if in the past, so for members who have been here way longer than I have, if there has ever been interaction between the department and the legislative committees on education surrounding kind of the big issues that we think that the state is facing. Because I know that I would get legislators who come and ask me after the meeting, we can't tell kind of what the coherent agenda is for the department, and why isn't Bessie ever taking positions on things? And so I'm wondering if we might be able to alleviate some legislative angst about kind of what our big desires are for the state if we were able to have kind of a more robust conversation. I don't know if that looks like a joint committee meeting. I have no idea. Has that ever happened before? Ms. Jones, Mr. Garvey, Ms. Bovee?
So to address your first question about department-backed bills that we request, so they do get the Bessie, currently, they do get the Bessie stamp of approval, but we can't bring anything without Bessie's approval on those. So we brought that package that we were asking legislators to carry on behalf of the department to the leadership, which was our current process. And so I understand you would like it to be in this realm. So yeah, that's something that we can work on, of getting in front of y'all with the leadership. If leadership desires that to happen, this is y'all process. I just implement your process. So that is something that we can do if that's something that you're willing to. For your second,
on that point,
yeah.
Before you get to the second point, those were robust conversations too between us and leadership, because we wanted to push forward an agenda that we thought would be helpful for the state and children of the state and the families. And so we brought ideas to leadership, and there were some of the ideas that we collectively thought, let's not pursue that right now. So that wasn't just a, here's what we want to do, check. I mean, it was a robust conversation with leadership and the department on that, so.
And I certainly appreciate that. I guess my question would be, if we know what those bills are ahead of time, why that's not a conversation that the entire board could have. And I do understand that there is a process, like, so what other legislators are bringing, that officers are having to decide kind of on the spot. Like, I understand the temporal demands of that. I guess I'm just curious, I don't understand why those same constraints would work on our entire DOE package.
Yeah, and I think the DOE package is something that we can bring to leadership and then bring before you as well, as a full board to discuss. The other thing that you're talking about is kind of like historically, so I don't know about any kind of joint committee hearings that they've done before with BESI members. I know right now, because I've heard the same things you've heard in the legislature, sitting at the table multiple times, of like, what are y'all doing across the street? And it just seems like there's like a disconnect in the communication. So you'll see this BESI meeting actually, you're seeing more legislators show up. We're trying to actively invite them here, trying to give them updates more regularly, so we invited them to the literacy retreat that we had yesterday. And if you go further back, this is probably 2013-ish timeframe, BESI had, I guess, these standing, they would vote on these principles, or these things that they believe in, position statements they believed in. And so that would provide kind of like guardrails on their leadership of how they would choose the selection of supporting, not supporting, things like that. Now, they haven't done that since 2013. We have examples of it. I know Ms. Davis sent that to us when this conversation first started happening. So it's really nice to have that historical perspective of those guideposts that they had put out there. So that may be something that we can also explore. So like the board at the beginning of the year, the legislative session, would vote on it and say, these are kind of our position statements, what we believe in, and what we want to do for children this session, or what our priorities are.
Let me add to that.
Mr. Gardy?
You get recognized, thank you. I was under the impression, and maybe I'm just remembering this wrong, that all of the BESI members were made aware of the positions that were going to be taken before they were taken. And that's not, I don't think, exactly what you're asking for. You're asking for it to be known at a BESI meeting so it can be discussed amongst everybody. I don't see any reason, unless it's a last-minute bill that's being worked on after the last BESI meeting before the legislative session starts. But
And I can add
I was thinking that letting all the members know about it before it goes to the legislature would be good enough, but I wasn't thinking about, it would be maybe better to have an open and public discussion of it before.
So this is the current process of what I've done. So I'll let you know kind of, and actually Dr. Dix, you responded back to my email. So at the end of filing, I actually get a list of all the bills that are filed. And then there's a late file that happens after that. Usually this is after our BESI meeting, depending on when the legislature meets. And even years and odd years, they meet at different times, some in April, some in March. So when I'm able to bring that before you, it's a little easier because I can put it in front of you. You can say, okay, here's the list of tracked bills. You have time to look over them. This year, because the session started so early, because it was a longer session, I sent everyone individually, here's all the pre-filed bills, review it, and send it back to me with your feedback of what you think on it. So this wasn't me going into detail about what each thing, I kind of hoped you could read the digest and understand a little more. And Dr. Davis, you turned yours and a few people turned theirs in. And that kind of helped me to color the conversations when I talked with leadership and we talked about the positions that were being taken. And then every time that leadership takes a position, and I tried to get better with this as the session went on, usually right after they would, I would send out an email that was, here's the positions for this upcoming week that they took, because committee meetings are usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes Wednesdays. So I was trying to keep that regular communication up, and then I sent that very detailed recap of the week. So I actually tried to get better at making sure that everyone was getting those updates right after positions were taken to try to get back and forth from people. Also, because I work closely with a lot of you, I I know what your interests are when it comes to legislation, so I can give you a heads up and say, hey, I know you told me to watch these type of bills, so this is coming up tomorrow, if you want to say, here's the position that's on there, and we'll be in committee. Usually it works for people who can be at the legislature. Sometimes it's a little more chaotic and we never know what's put on. I mean, Senate Ed likes to put up their agendas literally right at the 24-hour mark, which means I have to get positions and ready in place and write cards for the next day. So I have tried to like accommodate that. So that's just a little glimpse into the process now of how quickly, because things change very quickly. I mean, one word change in a law, in a bill, can change the entire meaning of the bill. So that's kind of just a glimpse into what we do during the process.
And if I could address one of the other issues, you talked about guardrails, and I was under the impression that we had talked about those this year. But in general, for the past several terms, the basic guardrails have been things like Bessie has been supporting parental choice. Bessie has been supporting higher standards. Bessie has been supporting transparency. And because we've had a majority of Bessie members that have supported all of those things, and probably a couple of other that I'm missing. But those are the items that we've been focusing on. And if a bill comes up that doesn't have to do with those, then it's, as I mentioned a couple of months ago, it's hard to know where 6 votes on Bessie would be because we haven't talked about those issues as much as we're talking about transparency and parental choice and accountability. So we hesitate to take a position because we don't know where Bessie would be on it. And so that's one reason we don't do it. Another reason is that some of these issues that are outside of those issues that I mentioned that we've been very consistent on, if you take a position on them, you're liable, and as I mentioned, this is just the ones that are not on your accountability, your higher standards, and parental choice. You can get into a quagmire with particular legislators and alienate them on this issue when you want to have them with you on your main focus areas. So sometimes we stay away from issues because it's a distraction from the main focus areas. But even on those distraction areas, legislators can ask the department, what do you think about this? What is your recommendation? Then Bessie, is not there. 6 votes Bessie is not there, but the superintendent or Mr. Melanson could say, well, this, our experience of 20, 30 years of being an educator, I think if you were to do this, it's going to have a bad outcome. And I don't know if these legislators are not going and taking advantage of that kind of a resource and are just looking for Bessie members to, or Bessie as a whole to take a position, but that is an available option for them to go to.
And Bessie takes position, they give me positions to present to the legislature on their behalf. The department goes under white card if they have those questions of how will this impact education if we pass this bill. Usually we have department staff who will be there and say, if this were to pass, this could potentially happen, this could not happen. So the department does provide information. Whenever I go with a card, as you know, I'm actually representing the interests of the board, not so much the department.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Mike?
Ms. Lawson, I don't know if this would be for you or Dr. Plumley. On the last page of your handout, there's a list of resolutions, specifically House Resolution 191. It directs Bessie to revise policies. We can go from there just so you know what I'm talking about. It says no policy action required. Do you know why no policy action is required if it's directing Bessie to do something?
You said it's 191?
Yeah, it's the last page, 5th one from the bottom.
Is that, yeah, Representative McGee's bill. So when it comes to the scholarship program, any accountability changes that are made by Bessie have to be made by the legislature. So that's in policy. Any changes to the accountability system for scholarship schools actually have to happen over there. I had a conversation with Representative McGee about this. He just wanted to make a statement with this and share that this is what he would want, because he did try to alter the accountability system there. So the reason why it says no policy action required is because legally we cannot make changes to the system without the approval of the legislature.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, sir. And you'll also see on all of these resolutions, it says no policy action required. Some of these are studies and reports, which I do have another document that has when all of those will be coming to you as well. So it's not that these aren't happening, these just did need actual policy revisions.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify since it appeared to direct us to you.
Any other questions, comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just a quick one, thank you very much. I want to say, I agree with Mr. Garvey that there is a historical pattern recognition. There are things that historically this board has championed, the majority of this board has championed. But I would argue there's a bunch of new things that have come up, particularly in this last legislative session, that this board hasn't even really had to grapple with, right? So I just want to second Dr. Davis's notion that if there's some way at the beginning of the session to even talk through the big ideas. We start the session knowing what big ideas are going to likely come forward. And we should have that conversation, right? This is a 5-6 board in terms of, it's nonpartisan, but it is 5-6 on, by party. And I just think there's some issues that if we are able to discuss it here, leadership will be best positioned to navigate as things come up reactively. Because we're still sort of assuming we know where 6 votes would be on this board. And I think that actually is a dynamic thing. It's not static.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Thank you.
I have a question. Do you know right now, I'm assuming that you do, when this next legislative session is going to start and when our last meeting before that is scheduled? And do we want to move the date of the DESI meeting to make it closer to the legislative session so we have more time to get as many bills in as possible onto our review?
Yeah, and so we're starting the process for looking into legislation for next year the department needs in. So that I can give you well ahead of time as we're working through that. When it comes to the legislative session next year, it begins, I'm pretty sure, in April, April 10th. And then 2 weeks before that is pre-filing deadline, so that's when most of your bills have to be pre-filed.
And Ms. Davis, when would our
It would be after.
last meeting before that?
Are you talking about we having a meeting in March? Is that what you mean?
Well, we have a problem, I think, in that we have to get the MFP out a certain amount of time before the session.
MFP is due March 15th every year.
So we can't move the March meeting back to early April to get it closer to the session because we have to do the MFP.
The MFP has to be there by March 15th, so.
We're meeting March 2nd.
Given the fact that it's like 6 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, like would it be possible that, maybe we don't need to add a big legislative package to our regular meeting, that perhaps a special call meeting that would be closer to the start of the session, that would just be dedicated to legislation and discussing those issues might be important. And I'll just like to echo Governor Jim's point about, we had that big literacy package, all of that literacy push from legislators, in particular the ones about holding students back. Like those were very controversial issues that we knew were coming, and aligned to something that's really important to the department and all of us, given the fact that we spent our retreat around literacy. And so I feel like that those were things that were incredibly puzzling the legislators, that we were not taking positions on those. And it was precisely, Mr. Garber, to your point, that the devil is in the details and it's a lot to unpack. But I feel like, could be doing more to delve into those issues and to come up with some pillars, so to speak, around literacy that we could be taking positions on, in my opinion.
Thank you. So,
Do we have money in the budget to have a special call meeting as was described?
Yes.
Great, let's plan on doing it.
thank you.
Want a motion to that effect?
Motion, please.
Move that we schedule a special call meeting on April, what?
When does it start? When does it?
It starts on April 10th, the legislative session, so 2 weeks before that would be the pre-filing deadline, so I would know within those 2 weeks what would be filed, so it have to be within those weeks.
How about just that, for me directly to work with the department to schedule a special call meeting?
I'm moving directly to work with the department to schedule a special.
Dr. Davis seconds it.
I'll follow Shan.
All right, thank you all. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just want to thank
You happy, Belinda?
I am very.
I'm so happy.
I just want to thank Mr. Longstaff for his work during session. He was at the Capitol for us the entire time, including many weekends, and so in long hours. So I just want to thank him personally, Ethan, for doing that and representing us well representing the board well at the table. But also all the staff that also contributed to helping him be prepared for every time he needed to be there. And also being there as backup support. So I had a really good session and did good stuff with it, so thank you, Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, fantastic job. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions, comments, any objections to this motion? Motion carried. Next item, please. Oh, wait, sorry. So sorry. We have a public comment card. Dr. James Finney. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Finney. Appreciate it.
That completes your agenda.
Thank you. 5 minutes.